Check out the latest footwear innovation from Adidas, the Adizero Adios Pro 2, which features carbon fiber energy rods that are both lightweight and precisely tuned for a more anatomical transition. Everything from the ultra-light polyester upper to the re-sculpted midsole and the reinvented outsoles are designed for speed. Visit adidas.com to learn more today.
A lot of us are looking for ways to start our day feeling more joy and appreciation. And while some of us write gratitude lists or do yoga, others pour themselves a bowl of their favorite cereal, Honey Nut Cheerios. Because not only are Honey Nut Cheerios delicious, they can help lower cholesterol as part of a heart-healthy diet. So maybe the secret to a great mood all day is a little yoga, then writing your gratitude list over a bowl of Honey Nut Cheerios. Learn more about a heart-healthy lifestyle at Cheerios.com.
Hey, and welcome to the Hypothalamic Amenorrhea podcast, an adulting advice podcast production. I'm Danny Sheriff, and this is the place to come if you care about getting your period regularly. This podcast aims to educate, inform, and keep you motivated on your period and HA recovery track. And quick disclaimer, guys, I'm not a doctor, and none of the information in this podcast is intended to replace medical advice. Always seek the advice from your physician. And guys, I wanted to share with you something I'm really excited about. I created a 7-day period recovery commitment challenge, and I made this about a month ago. I posted it on Instagram, and I had about 70 women go through this challenge, and it was super amazing. So I am now sharing it with you, where most of my amazing audience is here on the podcast, and I wanted you to know about it to see if you wanted to come and join me. So if you have HA and you're actually at a point where you're struggling to make the leap and actually commit to the commitment, actually commit to recovery, I would love for you to join. And it's really simple. It's actually just 7 days of emails. So I send you one email every day challenging you to do one particular part of the commitment. So this looks like committing to eating more. Then this looks like committing to working out less. Then this looks like committing to getting the support that you need and making the mindset shifts that you need to make and deciding to make actual changes to your life that allows you to actually get your period back for good. And then to reflect on how that went and if you think you can keep going down this recovery track. The challenge is free. It's basically an accumulation of everything that I have spoken to so many women about so far. And I just feel like I'm in the DMs and in the emails a lot talking to women about making the decisions and the commitment to change a certain aspect of their life to get their period back. So I've basically put it all together, all of the main roadblocks that we find and all of the best mindset strategies that I have for helping you make the decision to commit and get your period back. So if it's something you're interested in, the link to this challenge is in the show notes. All you have to do is chuck in your email and I will send one email to you every day for 7 days. And you should be able to go to hapodcast.com/7-day challenge. Let us all hope that my husband has set that up for me successfully by the time this airs, fingers crossed. But if he hasn't, I'll have a word to him. And just click the link in the show notes. Okay, enjoy the show with Leanne, guys. Hey guys, welcome back to the Hypothalamic Amenorrhea podcast, the hardest podcast to say on the internet. We are here joined by Leanne Matullo. Help me out.
Yeah,
Matullo. Awesome.
Not my maiden name, but
no, yeah. Well, I love it anyway. It sounds very Italian or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool. Well, Leanne is here to share with us both her story she has a lot to share about maybe Eastern methodologies
Mhm,
that we're
mhm.
all kind of curious about, what works, what doesn't, what's for me, what's not.
Yeah,
Should I just focus Western medicine? And she's going to introduce herself, what she does, and she's going to just roll with her story. And I'm hoping that you'll all learn a thing or two about, I don't know, like what rabbit hole you should go down in like a
rabbit
spiritual.
hole.
I feel like when I hear, I just think it's like when you dive into the HA thing, the whole
Mhm.
situation, and you start to learn about what works and what doesn't and what other people do, and you've tried every Western
That's right.
route, and you've tried to eat more and you've tried to exercise less, and maybe it's still not working, and then people are like, well, what else can I do to help myself? And I think that you're going to have some interesting stories and insights to tell, so take it away for
Yeah.
us, please.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me, and thank you for putting this together. When we connected over Instagram, I was like, oh my gosh, this is so perfect, because I think for a lot of us, when we have been diagnosed with hypothalamic amenorrhea, when we've been working through it, there aren't a whole lot of resources out there. And I'll be honest, there also aren't a whole lot of resources out there when it comes to the yoga space, the Eastern medicine space, the
Mm.
Ayurveda space. It's out there. It's just a little bit hard to uncover. So thank you for having me and for offering that.
You're
So
welcome.
yeah. So I am a yoga therapist, and I came into yoga therapy not necessarily for women's health. I came into it because I was also working with kids, and I was working with teens, at-risk youth, and I just found that there's a very real body-mind connection, which I can get into. And so, but my story took a bit of a turn when I was actually diagnosed with hypothalamic amenorrhea myself. So I can briefly talk about what yoga therapy is, and then maybe go into my story, and you can pause me at any point along the way. Uh, Yoga therapy is a healing modality. So just like there are other modalities towards wellness, towards healing, whether it be like mental health therapy or physical therapy or Reiki or whatever, yoga therapy is another tool. And so really what we're doing in yoga therapy is we're looking at the individual rather than the diagnosis. So when somebody is coming to yoga therapy and they're saying, I have amenorrhea, or I have PCOS, or I have anxiety, or something along those lines, we're treating the person rather than creating a protocol for the diagnosis, if that makes sense. And so to do that, there is a model in yoga therapy. It's called the kosha model. We can dive into that too. But the kosha model is essentially looking at the many layers of what it means to be human, and saying that we can't separate these things when we're trying to create wellness in the body-mind system. And so I won't say them all in Sanskrit. I can, but I won't say them all in Sanskrit now. So the 5 layers would be the physical, the energetic, the emotional, the intuitive, and the spiritual. And so kosha means layer, or means body. And so what I do is I work with individuals to assess like wellness in all of those areas and to integrate them. So again, I'm really looking at an individual's environment, an individual's constitution, and I'm using the tools of yoga and Ayurveda to do that. So tools of yoga would be things that we might see when we go into a yoga practice, when we go into a yoga class. So the asana, the postures, but it's also much deeper than that. So I'm also using breath work. I use a lot of breath work when working with folks. Meditation, I use quite a bit of Ayurveda tools. So Ayurveda is the science of life, and it's one of the oldest forms of medicine in the world. And so what I found is that individuals really see more progress because they're just integrating all of these pieces of themselves. So that's a little bit about what I do in terms of yoga therapy and bringing in Ayurveda. So sometimes these worlds are separate, and I just kind of combine the two. I bring them together. Yeah.
Cool. Thank
Yeah.
you. I'm sure a lot of people are actually really curious, including myself, like where does yoga and those kinds of practices fit
Mm.
into having HA. So
Yeah. Yeah.
cool. So what happened next?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let me actually, so when it comes to yoga and HA, that's also a part of my story. So I can
Mhm.
share a little bit about that.
Yeah.
So I was diagnosed with hypothalamic amenorrhea, maybe like, I'm thinking like 6 or 7 years ago. And so at that time, I was pretty young. I wanted to start a family. I was about 26 when I originally found out. And so my husband and I had started to decide, yeah, we want to have a family. And so like a lot of women, I was on the pill for maybe close to a decade. When you're on the pill, I don't think you know a whole lot of what's happening to you. And so you're actually not having a natural cycle. So when I came off, I thought, oh, well, this will be easy. I'll come off the pill. My period will start, like, no problem. However, there was this kind of thing and like this fear in the back of my mind that it wouldn't be that easy. I think that was kind of like my tuition, like, like there's actually more to this. And so a month went by, 2 months went by, 3 months went by, and I still hadn't started my cycle. And so I went to my doctor, so my OBGYN, and she wasn't concerned. She took my vitals, she took my weight, she asked about my movement practices. She wasn't concerned. She said, this is sometimes what happens when you come off the pill. You just have to wait it out. However, 6 months went by, and I was like, I think something's actually wrong. And at that time too, these are pretty classic symptoms for a lot of people when it comes to amenorrhea. My hair was falling out. My nails were really brittle. I had horrible digestion. So there's just all these other symptoms that were continuing to creep up. And so I eventually went to see a reproductive endocrinologist. And I had a very hard visit with him. I don't know if other people have had, hard visits with some, and this is also a very sensitive matter. It's a sensitive experience. But I remember going to see him, and again, had taken all the blood work. My blood work was all over the place. So this is very like, okay, you're having an issue. This is like kind of the rabbit hole you go down in the Western model. My blood work was all over the place. Some hormones really high, some really low. Ordered all the tests. I had the ultrasound. I had the HSG. Folks would know what that is, where they're kind of testing to see if there's a blockage in the fallopian tubes. All of those things were fine. They came back normal. However, the one thing he said that still kind of stands out to me to this day is that when they looked at the ultrasound, that my uterus, and again, at this point I was like 27, my uterus was looked like that of a postmenopausal woman. And I just, without actually saying this is your diagnosis, so basically just saying that to me and saying that you may be able to write this, but probably not on your own. And then he said, I'm diagnosing you with hypothalamic amenorrhea. And when I asked him, he basically said that your reproductive system has shut down. It just has shut down. And I know that you've had other guests talk about what this is, what this diagnosis actually is on the show before.
Feel free to repeat it if you want to.
Yeah,
you never know who's just jumping in.
Right, who's coming on. Well, it was just really interesting because that was essentially the way that he said it. Like, basically it shut down. I don't know if it'll turn back on again. And it was really, really abrupt. It was really hard for me to hear, but there was something in my body that was like, actually, he's wrong. Like, he's wrong. Like, my body actually can heal. I don't know how, but I think it can heal. I think it can bring it back. It's back to balance.
I had the same intuition of not the same story, but just like OBGYN being like, well, if you take this progesterone challenge, you'll get your period back. And just feeling like, I don't think that's how that works.
Yeah, I did that too. Yeah, it's like, exactly. So I just remember that feeling and being so angry, but I think I needed that kind of wake up call, because when I went to see him like for maybe like 6 months after the fact, and he kept recommending IUI. And again, we wanted to get pregnant. So it wasn't just about bringing my cycle back for the sake of health. I think that's definitely a piece of it. But at the time I was just like, baby, And so he was recommending IUI, which is intrauterine insemination, and then IVF, so in vitro fertilization. And then nothing is wrong with those practices, but something in me was like, no, like I'm going to write this. I'm going to figure this out. And so around that time, I started to actually really look inwards at like what I was doing. So when he diagnosed me with this, and he was basically saying your reproductive system has shut down. And then I started to do some more research. And one of the definitions that really hit me of HA was there's too much mental and physical stress on the body. So not like one or the other, but usually they run in tandem. And when that happens, the body wants to stay alive. So it's just going to redirect, attention into all the other places. So digestion and decreasing inflammation and getting rest. And for whatever reason, I was like, so what stress am I putting on my body?
That was my next question. I was like, okay, so do you know what was up? What were you so stressed about?
At the time, no. Like, I kind of did. So on the more physical side, I was a dancer for 23 years. And so I had been on the pill in part of my dance career. And so a lot, what I'm saying is I think I actually had this condition for a lot longer than maybe the few years coming off of the pill. But after that, I had been diagnosed in my early 20s. I was diagnosed with a gluten allergy. So I became really obsessed with food. And so I know that people are starting to become more familiar with this term orthorexic. I was definitely that. Like I ate, but I just watched everything that I ate. Certain foods were bad, certain foods were good. And then I ran a ton. Like I was a big runner. So it's just that classic, like over exercising, under eating kind of mentality in the world. And the hard part is you get praised for it. Hard part is like, that's like an acceptable addiction in the Western world, is to be that active, to be able to run miles and miles and miles. I had started doing yoga. So after I got off of out of the dance world, I had started doing yoga, but I was only doing like power yoga, hot yoga, things that were really intense. And so what we're talking about here is not only things that are like physically stressful, but also things that are mentally stressful. So I also had this mental stress of, I was a director of development. So I was a director of fundraising, and I was like obsessed with, climbing a ladder and like continuing my career. And so all these worlds kind of collide. And what I think I was doing was using the exercise and the food to create some sense of control in my stressed out mind. And actually it just created more stress. And that's what really led to the amenorrhea. And so when I really think about it, all of these pieces, and addiction's talked about a lot in our culture, but all of these pieces are forms of addiction, like overworking and over exercising, and maybe like under eating or obsession with food. Like these are all addictions. And so that was one of the things that I had to start to focus and grapple with. And the hard part is you can't take a pill for that. Like you really have to really take your time and ease into it. So that is, long story short, and we can dive more into that too, but that was kind of the process that I went down. I stopped seeing him. I got referred to another OBGYN, got a couple of other referrals, and I felt like I was just a project, like a scientific project. They're like, oh, there could be something wrong with your chromosomes, or like, oh, like this could be wrong, I started to gain weight a bit, but I really wasn't. I wasn't getting my cycle back. And at this point, it became less about having a kid and more about like, well, I just need to be healthy, because now I'm learning more about HA, and I'm learning more about the effects of it, like in terms of like osteoporosis and bone density and all of those things. And I just wanted to right the ship. So I started to now do what I practice, what I teach other people on, which is yoga therapy. And then I also started, which I know we were going to talk about, I also started to see an acupuncturist. And within 6 months of really like totally revamping my lifestyle, I got my cycle back. And it was like the best day ever, because I hadn't had a natural period in probably like 12 years, because being on the pill, it's not a natural one. And then I had 2 regular cycles, wasn't necessarily trying to get pregnant, but after 2 cycles, I found out I was pregnant with our son. So it was like, yeah, it was like a happy ending, and an incredibly challenging way to get there. But yeah, that's really and I hope that that's helpful, because I think a lot of women go down those paths.
Yeah. I think a couple, based on some of the DMs that I've been getting, a lot of people message me and they're like, are you going to have someone talk about this kind of thing? And are you going to have someone share this story? Because I'm not actually trying to get pregnant. And even though, part of your story was that you were trying to get pregnant, it's like very important to me to make clear that like, regardless of that goal, it's still the same situation for everyone.
Yep, nodding my head. Yes.
Yeah. And so it's cool how you were just like, oh, I'm not ready to have a baby at this point.
Yeah.
I have to fix these other issues. And also just to touch on the orthorexia piece, where it's not necessarily just like all about weight loss for people. And I'm sure like a part of it really was for you, because A, that's the culture we're in, and B, you were a dancer, and that's a part of that culture too. And the orthorexia one's just so important, so prominent, right? Like even though we're trying to eat, we're still really mindful about what we're putting in our body. And people, which is how we accidentally got in this situation. And so it's so counterintuitive and confusing and challenging for people to just eat more of anything and do no exercise. And it's really a part of many of our like personalities to want to go down this route that we're about to talk about of healing with, every other possible option. And there's so much skepticism about whether or not those things work, including myself. I've done a couple of things. So I'm really excited to hear about this from you, because I did a couple of things and then I like got a few random periods over my time. And I was like, well, that's weird because I just went to the chiropractor for the first time and I just got a period and I did nothing else different. Or I did some acupuncture and then like 6 weeks later I got a period and I did nothing else different.
Very
But
interesting.
super interesting, but I couldn't get those things to work again.
I gotcha.
So
Okay.
I'm like super confused
Like
and
a subtle little like push from like the energetic realm that like you're stepping in the right direction, right?
maybe, yeah, but I'm
Yeah.
curious, is it
Yeah.
like the fact that that worked and then I focused so much on it, did that like just re-spike my stress and start something all over again?
Right.
So please teach me
Yeah.
about
So when you say that, the word that comes to mind is prana and chi. So yes, it could be that. It could be like, oh, my stress, my head kind of wrapping around this and like wanting there to be a particular outcome could be the reason why that's not happening. But both of those modalities, so chiropractic work and then also acupuncture, they're working with prana, whether or not they say it. So acupuncture, Chinese medicine, they would more liken it to chi. So prana is in yoga, chi is in Chinese medicine. They both are derived from Ayurveda, which again I talked about earlier is the oldest form of medicine, one of the oldest forms of medicine, and they both mean life force energy. So what we're trying to do, and this is where like it gets a little woo, and people who are like, I don't know, so I don't usually like pull that one out of the gate. But if we're doing yoga practices, if we're doing meditation, if we're putting ourselves in nature, if we're interested in acupuncture, we're trying to build our energy. We're trying to literally feel good in our body. Like even exercise, moving our bodies, what we consume, all of that is contributing to life force energy. And so I'm not as familiar with chiropractic work. I did a little bit of it, but I'm very much more familiar with Ayurveda, yoga therapy, and then of course acupuncture. Is those modalities, when you're doing acupuncture, they're actually stimulating the fascia. And so the fascia contains in Chinese medicine and also in Ayurveda, it's the connective tissue that runs throughout the body. So it's not your muscles, not your ligaments, your joints, your bones. It's like the connective tissue that kind of is in between those spaces. And there's a lot of research being done on fascia, but one of the things that I've been reading a lot about is that when you're doing acupuncture, the needles, they stimulate that connective tissue, and that tissue has memory. And what we're trying to do is actually stimulate it to build the life force energy, to actually build some more stabilizing force in the body, if that kind of makes sense. So it sounds like to me that the body was stimulated in a good way by using chiropractic work and acupuncture. And I don't know how much time was spaced in between. I think a lot of times when you're trying to write something or you're really trying to heal, it takes a lot more than maybe like, for example, for me, when I was doing acupuncture, I was going every week for 6 months, which for a lot of people that may not be accessible, every other week, which is one of the reasons why I also like yoga therapy, because you can do a lot of it at home. You don't necessarily need to see a yoga therapist every single time, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that's what I'm thinking about.
Yeah. I mean, I was just like telling you where my curiosity comes from, basically. Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of other people have these experiences where they're like, either A, that didn't work, or B, did that work? I think that might have actually worked, and I can't quite tell. So when it comes to, let's see my question over here more specifically. So can you dive a little bit into what it looks like specifically for HA recovery when you blend Western and Eastern modalities? Like where is the best place maybe for someone to start? What could they expect? And just like if you have HA, like what's good?
Yeah. So that's the thing, is like we want these practices to work together, and you also want to take what resonates and like leave what doesn't. So when I'm thinking about like yoga practices or yoga therapy practices, I know a lot in the HA world, it's like no movement, like maybe walking, like nothing. So for some people, and this is based off of what I would call a constitution of an individual, some people that actually really affects them in a pretty negative way. It affects their mental health. It affects, the way their bodies actually feel. And so there are certain practices that I would say, yeah, definitely do in terms of yoga. So I would do like nothing hot, nothing sweaty, nothing powerful. Like even though yoga is attached to it, that does not mean it's what you need, but something that's like really gentle, really slow moving. Even if, you do like 5 postures and it takes like 15 minutes, not even 10, 15 minutes, it can have a really profound effect on the body, on the way the body feels, on the healing process, on the way the mind feels. So that's something I definitely want to throw out there, is like sometimes we hear no movement. And especially for those of us, I know not everybody has this story, but for those of us who have been kind of obsessed with movement, that can be very drastic. And it can also have, negative effects on the flip side. So I always put that out there. And, I'm looking on my bookshelf, there's books out there. I know there's a book, there's 2 books out, and I can also send it to you if you wanted to put in show notes, on fertility and yoga for fertility. And there's, some really basic, and when I say basic, I mean, you can easily do them at home without a teacher, yoga practices that are really focused on hip opening, getting blood flow into the pelvis, opening up the heart space, opening up the chest, allowing the breath to move. So I think those kind of practices, if like we take nothing, like just no hot yoga, no intense yoga, but you can still do it. And there can be a lot of benefit to it with the right practices.
Okay. So say I am a intense exercise fiend, which I am / was. And I'm like, I just don't think that my void can be filled with 5 postures.
Yeah.
Is there could I potentially be surprised if I just give it a shot? So basically, I'm super reluctant, but if I try, is this something that you think I could be pleasantly surprised by? Someone who just like really craves and loves movement? Or do you think there needs to be more of like a process to get to that point where I can do 5 postures and that can really help make me feel really good?
Yeah. So it depends on the person. I would probably ask you why. Like I'd want to get more to the root of like, where does the exercise fiend, like where does all of that movement, where does it come from? Like, why are you moving your body so much? And so you could answer that question, or somebody else could. Sometimes it's like, well, I have so much anxiety. I have so much stress. This is the only way that I can get it through my body. And then I might ask more like, okay, well, where is the stress coming from? Like what are you trying to control for? And as we keep kind of getting down to the root of why we're moving so much, because if we really look at it, if our body's like not producing a period, something's wrong. So clearly like the body's trying to give us a signal of, hey, this is a signal that's not necessarily we're treating the symptom or the signal, but that something's actually wrong here. So if we really dig deep, maybe we actually don't want to move that much. Maybe we're actually trying to control for something else that's coming up in our life. So I think if I was working with somebody one-on-one, I would just keep asking why? And I'm going to be really honest. I know a lot of people are super resistant to this. They're like, no way. Like, this is just the way I am. This is just the way I have to be. But I would suspect that for people who are that intense in terms of like fitness and exercise, there is a reason, there's a root cause of why that is. And then from there, I would say like for me, and this is why it took 6 months, even longer. I had HA for 2.5 years before I got my period. So maybe longer because I was on the pill and I just didn't know. But I would say that you might have to step it down gradually. So like, for example, if we're a runner, it's going to be really, I understand that. It's going to be really hard to be like, I cannot do any running and then I'm going to just sit and then do 5 postures. And so this is why it's on such a case-by-case basis. Like you might say, all right, well, I call it a wog. Like you might like walk for 3 minutes and then jog for a minute and then walk for 3 minutes and jog or something along those lines. And then you might like bring it down to do like an hour yoga practice and then maybe a 30-minute. But yeah, I mean, I would say if somebody was that open, I could say, try these 5 postures. I'm telling you, it's going to be great. And they're open to it. Yeah, they're going to see benefit. But if they're not open to it, probably not. Like they're probably going to resist it the entire time.
Okay. So, so being open and ready to do this kind of full on all in is really important. And if you're having some resistance, it can be harder to get the benefits.
Yeah. If you're having a resistance, and that's where I would say like, why? Like, where is this resistance coming from? Is it like I'm afraid I'm going to have a panic attack if I don't do something that's really intense? I'm afraid my body's going to look a certain way if I don't do it. I'm afraid, I'm afraid I'm not going to be enough if I don't do this certain thing. Usually the root cause of almost all of these questions is I am not enough. I am not worthy because fill in the blank. That's usually where it comes from.
So how do you feel then about people working with a therapist or something similar while they're...
Like incredible but true stories? Audible has plenty by some of the best writers out there. Find out about one at the end of this episode.
Parent, volunteer, employee. With your different roles and busy schedule, how can you find time to complete the degree you once started? Cornerstone University's programs are designed for busy adults like you. Take one course at a time, back to back, to move through your degree quickly. Attend through an on-campus, live stream, or 100% online format, whichever works best for you. If you're ready to go further in your goals, we're here to make it possible. Achieve without ceasing. Learn more at adult.cornerstone.edu.
Going through this in this moment, it sounds amazing if you would be able to like have a chat with a mental health professional or just a support system of some kind whilst you're integrating these.
Yeah. Oh, so I 100% think that's amazing. My yoga therapy practice, I do a little bit of talk therapy. I'm not a talk therapist, so I usually stop it after like the 15-20 minute mark, and then we get into the body, then we do movement, then we do breath work, and I give you homework and practices that you would do from home. If you didn't want to go that route and you wanted to find a mental health therapist and integrate your yoga that way, I think it's paramount, because a lot of times, like in any diagnosis, we think it's just about the body, but the mind is really involved. And oftentimes, like a symptom in the body is actually pointing to a mental condition. And I say that this could be a whole other rabbit hole that we go down. I say that with an awareness of the chakra system. So are you familiar with the chakra system?
I am familiar.
Yeah, it's basically subtle anatomy. So we have like physical anatomy, we have our physical form, like our muscles and our bones and all of that. So subtle anatomy is actually, it's these energy centers that if you look in, like, if you Google it, you'll see them run up and down the midline. There are these 7 energy centers that run up and down the spine. They're also all over the body, but that's a much bigger conversation. And so what the chakras point to is just different imbalances that are physical and also emotional. So if we look at, we're just going to open Pandora's box for a second. If we look at the center where reproduction is, that's like the sacral region of the body. This would be second chakra. And second chakra is all about creativity and flow and pleasure and joy and bliss in life. And sometimes, and I'm not going to say all the time, but sometimes, and this is certainly my story, is with a diagnosis like HA, we are pushing really hard in one or multiple areas of our lives. And we also may not be allowing ourselves to feel what pleasure actually is, to experience joy, to be all in. And so by focusing some of our practices in that region that I mentioned earlier, so like the hips, the pelvis, all of that area, like bringing blood flow there, we're actually healing multiple parts of our layers, our body, our energetic selves, and our minds. And so certainly having a therapist could help with that, to help to combine those two worlds.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, in a perfect world, you would be able to have all those things.
Yeah, you have a team, right? It takes a village. It takes a village to like have a child. It takes a village sometimes in terms of your health and your wellness.
Yeah, it kind of
does.
All right. Tell me a bit about how acupuncture and yoga like actually work / help you.
Mm-hmm. That's a big question. Did you have?
I know. I know. So, I mean, choose one or be an overview. But for someone like me who's like never really dove down the rabbit hole of Chinese medicine and of yoga practices and understanding all the chakras and that kind of thing, you know, say I'm like, that's super woo-woo, right?
Yeah.
How could you explain to me from like a high level, like it's not that crazy, right? Here is what it is. Yeah.
So I'll also like, I feel like it's helpful to share a little bit my story. So acupuncture, even as somebody who's been practicing yoga at that point for at the time I started acupuncture, I've been practicing yoga for close to like 6 years. You know, at 7 years, I was a teacher trainer. You know, I was teaching all over. I had my own studio. I was really resistant to acupuncture. I was really nervous about it. So I'll definitely say that even though I was like bought into this world of there is something else than just the physical experience or something else in terms of like our emotional field and our energetic field and all that, I was still like, I don't know, like putting needles in my body. I'm not sure. I will say that the time that I spent with my doctor of Oriental medicine, who I love, and he's in Pennsylvania, so nowhere near me now. I'm in Rhode Island now, so not nowhere near me. I've never felt more present, especially at that time. I'd never felt more present in my body and in my life than in the time that I was with him. So it was almost for me when I did acupuncture, like a weight lifting. You know, I'd done all these practices in terms of yoga, and yoga definitely helped, but in acupuncture, you cannot move. Like you are literally laying on a table. So it's literally teaching you how to be still. And if you have a very good doctor, they're going to go through your blood work. They're going to go through your medical history. They're going to go through all these things, and they're going to find out what we hear a lot in Western world is what's normal. And so this is something that I love about the Eastern world is there's normal like ratios, there's normal in terms of like the spectrum, and if you're looking at like a blood work or hormones, but there's also what's normal for you, for the individual. And so good practitioners will say, yeah, that's normal, but clearly it's not working for you because you still have HA, right? Or you still have whatever it is. So I think, this is the act of learning to be still is something that we do not learn in our culture. It's not something we learn. It's not something we value. And so when I think about acupuncture, it was literally the time for me, even as a yoga teacher, like as a business owner, as a yoga therapist, it was that time for me that I literally had to learn how to be still, and I couldn't do anything. So I will say like, that's like a really high level. There's other things happening while those needles are in, but it was really beautiful. And the whole part of yoga, everybody thinks yoga is about like movement and it's about de-stressing and all that. And it is, like, for sure. But the movement is a means to teach you how to be in your stillness, to actually teach you how to be with yourself. And if we all could learn how to do that, I swear there would be so much less stress in the world. Like there would just be, if we could learn to be with ourselves and be with our thoughts and not be so wrapped and absorbed and thinking that we are our thoughts, our bodies would respond a lot differently.
I love this actually. Like it kind of just a light bulb in my head went off.
Yeah.
Because I have done acupuncture, and I did experience that. For like 1 hour, I basically almost fell asleep.
Yeah.
I was so relaxed, and I did that for 1 hour instead of 1 hour of intense exercise.
Yeah.
So replacing the exercise with that in my schedule both fills that gap in my schedule, makes me feel like I'm doing something good for myself, which is kind of like a tendency of people with HA is like feeling like we're being productive. And you're being put in this position where you are forced to chill out. And then there's also, the magical, wonderful benefits of acupuncture, which I don't fully know myself, but they're happening. And if you're someone with HA, there's a high chance that you're like a multitasker, high achiever, do, go, go person. And yeah, it just sounds like an amazing opportunity, both yoga and acupuncture, to force yourself out of that. And my experience with doing yoga was actually extremely anxiety inducing in the beginning, right? Because I would be in this pose and it's like half an hour, 45 minutes in, and I just want to go and do something productive.
Yes.
Like this yoga thing, I'm so hating this right now. And realizing that that's happening is like, that's incredible. I'm exactly where I need to be.
Exactly.
If that's what's happening, it's exactly where I need to be. So if anyone is sitting there like, well, I don't want to do that because that's going to stress me out even more. Maybe it's something that's just worth like being aware that that's the thought you're having, and then realizing, okay, well then maybe this is something for me. And when those thoughts come up of like, I hate this, I could be doing so much more, I could be working out, I could be just doing my job, my super high stress job, that's kind of when you're like, okay, good, that means I'm in the right place.
Totally. That's like, that's the whole purpose of yoga too, is like the study of the self. So when we start recognizing like our relationship to productivity, like why do I have this need to always be productive? Like what is that from, And I would say that's a really common thing that happens in yoga, especially for those of us who are like, yeah, I'm going to do yoga, I'm going to do the intense thing, the vinyasa flow, which I love vinyasa, especially as a dancer. Like that's something that I really do love. It can be really hard to slow it down, because that's where we're actually learning to be with ourselves. That's where we're starting to learn, oh, I have these thoughts, I have other things I need to unpack. I just don't want to necessarily, and I'm not ready to. But yoga will actually facilitate that process. So I think that's actually beautiful that you shared that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm like a total stress head. If you want, I need to be like brushing my teeth and doing something at the same time. So for me to use those types of things to like help pull me out of that is really valuable. And I think a lot of people listening will find that too.
Yeah, it's really, go ahead.
Oh, well, I was just going to say, but you can add on your thing after I do, especially right now during COVID and really just like, I honestly do get quite a few messages from people who are like, well, I just can't afford all of these things. I would love to then talk about breath work, because that sounds like something that's super valuable that you can do as soon as you finish listening to this episode.
Yeah. So breath work, when I talked about the kosha model and having these 5 different layers of what it means to be human, the breath is like the second layer. So we have like our physical, which we think would be, the breath would be a part of that, and it is. But breath is really related to that prana, that life force energy that we talked about. So literally when you're breathing air into the body, you're breathing prana in. And there are hundreds of breath techniques. I mean, you could go anywhere, like you could type them in and really see them. But what we're trying to do is actually get breathing techniques that ground you. So one of the practices that's just, anybody can do is to just sit down. You can set a timer for 2 or 3 minutes and just start to notice your breath. Just start to give your breath different adjectives. So as you breathe, notice if the breath is shallow, if it's smooth, if it's jagged, if it gets stuck anywhere in the body. So you're just learning to study it. And by doing that, you're naturally starting to drop yourself out into that, like out of that scattered, constantly productive place and into your body. And that's the practice. That's actually what we're trying to learn how to do, is to learn to slow down and be still and be with ourselves. So that's like very, very, very simple practice. Another practice that I often recommend is counting the breath and having an equal inhale and an equal exhale. So, as you inhale, you might inhale for a count of 4. And as you exhale, you might exhale for a count of 4. A lot of us, that sounds really easy. For a lot of us, it's actually tremendously difficult. A lot of us have a really hard time taking a deep breath, or we might have a really hard time exhaling that completely. Both of those things point to what I would call, this is what I was going to talk about earlier, is really high, what we call vata, really high air energy, which means like scattered energy rather than like water, earth energy being grounded into the body. And we need all of the elements, but what it will do is that breath will just bring it back into balance and start to teach us how to actually build our own prana. And eventually you might, as you sit, you might breathe in for 4, breathe out for 4. And after like 2 or 3 minutes, you might notice, I actually have more breath capacity. I want to stay here. You might increase the count. You might increase to 6, exhaling for 6, and 8 and 8 and 10 and 10 and 10. So those are 2 practices to get started. It's just noticing the breath and then equalizing the breath.
I don't know how many clients that you work with that specifically have HA, but from your experience or even just your hunches, how big a role, sorry, my video like keeps freezing my face on this and I just have to like restart it again. It's so annoying. How many people do you think are really suffering more from the stress, commitment, overload, perfectionism thing than just being in this like calorie deficit, energy deficit situation? Totally loaded question, and it's probably just like what your hunch or your theory is.
Okay, it's a really good question. I think it's a both. I think that the perfectionism is actually what leads to the calorie counting, the macro counting, like all that stuff. It leads to the deficiency because we're so obsessed with perfection, and in our culture, perfection is taught as something that's really hard to attain. Perfection doesn't actually exist. So I think it's a both and. Like I really do. I think that the wanting certain outcomes, because lots of times when we see folks who have HA, and this is also like a grand stereotype, so a generalization, so this is not for everyone.
Totally.
But they're also really high achievers, even when you see like young girls who have hypothalamic amenorrhea, who are gymnasts or who, are running track or whatever, they're also pretty high achievers, not in their sport, but in other areas of life. And so I think that this feeds into it. And the question just becomes like, why? Like, why am I, like, why do I have this? Why do I have this desire? And I was totally there. I always say I'm a reformed type A. Sometimes I have that tendency to lean back that way, but it's just constantly asking the question, like, who is this perfect for? Because at some point, the constant movement and the counting of every calorie and the watching of every little thing that we eat becomes exhausting. It like truly, and it takes away from prana, so that life force energy, which also is the thing that gives us creative energy, or the work that we really want to put out into the world, what we want to be known for, the relationships that we want to have, that kind of perfectionism starts stealing from all of those other areas of our life.
Yeah. And the reason I asked that question, that was an amazing answer, because the reason I asked that question is I say a lot that healing from HA is actually easy. It's the mental part that's really hard.
It's so hard.
It's so hard. And I don't think that anyone, so people get HA who don't have these perfectionistic tendencies, right?
Yes.
And a lot of those people are not listening to this podcast. And that the reason is because they find out they have it, they find out the solution, and they just fix it, and it's not a big deal
right.
for them. Right. If it's hard for you, you're probably listening to this show and you've read every book and article and blah, blah, blah. So I really think that, like, if you could maybe get your period back, but you'll probably lose it again because you haven't fixed the root issue, which is your insane perfectionism and your need to multitask and your need to be busy and your need to just like fit this mold that society has made for you. So that's why I was really pumped to talk to you. I feel like these modalities are such an important way for you to create long-term sustainable recovery and not just like eat more, exercise less, get one period back, and then like have to white knuckle for the rest of your life.
That's right.
Making sure you always have a period while you hate everything about it. You know, if you can do this breath work, do this meditation, do this yoga, and it will help you realize, you know, that there's so much more to you and to life and to relaxation that I just feel like that's such a selling point to getting on top of these things.
Yeah, I think sometimes we create these practices in our lives, whether it's like, you know, our exercise, like I don't even really love the word fitness anymore, so I don't really use it, but, you know, our fitness, our eating, like we create all of these, you know, our work, you know, wanting to climb a ladder, we create all these practices because we're striving for something to create worthiness. Like, this is what makes me worthy, like even productivity, like this is what makes me worthy. And what those things do is they create a lot of rigidity in our lives. So they create almost too much structure, you know, and that those are, as we talked about, those are all added stresses. And as I mentioned, the chakra system, and anybody can Google it. It's fascinating if you want to go down that journey. And as you just pointed to, that's all very root chakra related. So root chakra sits at the base of the spine, and it's all about kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We really have to have this basic need of worthiness and understanding that we are worthy as we are, just as we are in this moment, that we actually don't need anything to pile on top of us to actually attain that. And so when we start to let these really rigid structures go, we begin to have more fuller experiences with life. This is, in yoga, we would call it Shakti. We would call it life force. That's a different variation of life force energy. It's more, I don't think it'll be weird to say, more like goddess energy. Oh,
I love it. It's really like if you want to change your life and you really want to heal from this very strong foundation and structure that you've created for yourself, this is such an amazing route. And I just I love the idea of waking up and doing some breath work and doing some yoga and like getting out into nature as much as possible, and just how life-changing that can be and how much that can help you to stay on track with the, you know, with the other physical protocols of like resting more and eating more. The two really like supplement each other in a really important way.
Yes. 100%. Yeah.
Cool. All of that just sort of came to me through this whole like listening to you talk about all of it.
Beautiful. Yeah. And as you say that too, this whole like getting up and like, you know, morning practices are so important. Morning rituals and routines are so important. If we can start to also reframe the conversation about what is movement, you know, like breath work actually is a form of movement. So as you talked about, I'm replacing my run or my exercise with going to the acupuncturist. I can replace some of that time, you know, once I get comfortable with doing like 20, 30 minutes of breath work or meditation or both together. You know, this is a form of movement. You have to be able to expand your ribs and your belly and your heart space and the back body to breathe. You know, a lot of us, we suck it in, you know, we're rigid all the time. And so that also is a form of movement, and it can feel incredible. It can feel really, really good.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all that and giving everyone a bit of insight into something that's kind of like, for a lot of people, just very alien. They haven't gotten to I don't know, like just chat with someone who understands all of this kind of thing. So we have only a few minutes left. So I wanted to ask you two more questions. One of them is just about body image. This is just a huge one for so many people listening. And I feel like every guest has just something super valuable to share on it. So one of the biggest roadblocks when it comes to healing HA is your body image. It's just looking in the mirror and freaking out. So if someone's having a negative body image day in their recovery, what is a tip or two or a perspective that you could share to help someone just get through that?
Yeah. One of the biggest things I would say is to acknowledge it. So rather than being like beating yourself up about, oh my gosh, like, you know, I can't believe I'm having that thought about myself, having that thought, you know, like I'm having this bad body image day, is to just acknowledge it, just to be like, okay, this is how I feel in this moment. Because one of the things about yoga is to actually acknowledge every single emotion that we feel, and that none are right or wrong or good or bad. They just are. And from there, if we can acknowledge that this is how I feel in this moment, we can start maybe get a little bit more curious about like why that is. You don't even have to ask that question, but you might say like, okay, why? And just giving yourself that grace. So that would be the number one thing. I also think it's really important to get in your body on those days. And I don't mean get in your body in terms of like getting on like your spin bike or whatever, you know, like running, like walking miles and miles, but allow yourself, you know, in yoga, we think about it oftentimes as just these series of postures, but like shaking, tapping, dancing, singing, anything that just drops you into your body to actually remind you of this vessel is really, really important. I would also say it's incredibly important. In Ayurveda, we're also talking about like adorning the body and taking care of the body, that you have clothes, you have scarves, you have things that you love that feel cozy, that feel nice on your skin, and that you put on. And when you put those on, you feel pretty good about yourself. I actually say that a lot in this like COVID world, is like, wear comfortable clothes, wear beautiful clothes if you can, you know, like really wrap your body in something like warm and cozy and loving, because that will start to shift the energy around those other negative emotions that you have.
Nice. That's like a more beautiful, tangible way of like that concept of just get up in the morning and get dressed and like have a shower and wash your face. It's like, well, yeah, to adorn yourself.
Adorn your body. Yeah. I think so often too, when we go through like HA and we go through any of these experiences, we might be like really, I went through this where I wore like a lot of like black and gray, and I still wear black. I mean, I'm from the DC area, so I still wear black, but like the idea of like, wait a second, I'm actually going to put on like a bright, you know, scarf or a good pair of earrings. It can just really change the way that you show up, change your vibration.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you so much. Where can people learn more about you and what you do and how you work with people?
Yeah, I would say the best place would be to go to my website. So that's yogadear.com. And dear is spelled like Dear Diary. It's DEAR.com. There are tons of resources on there. I write about every week, whether it's about women's health or about making yoga really, really practical. So this week I actually wrote about water and bringing the water element into your life, which is very related to that sacral chakra, that pleasure, you know, that bringing that the element of bliss into your world. Also very related to HA. So I wrote about that. That would be the best place. There's other resources there too. If you want to start your own home practice and you have no idea how to set it up, you don't need a whole room. You don't need a whole yoga room. You can have a corner of that room. I have a whole guide on how to do that on my website. It's totally free. You can download that. And there's also a free meditation there too, a yoga nidra meditation where I guide you through 20 minutes of relaxation. You actually lay down. So it's kind of like you're sleeping, but you're actually awake.
What?
Yeah. So you can.
Audio?
It's an audio, an audio meditation. Yeah, just all about like letting yourself like just be and relax. Yeah, so that resource is there. I have a couple other resources there on navigating anxiety and depression and loss, which I think is also very wrapped in HA. We could have a whole conversation about that. That's on my website too. So yeah.
Awesome. Okay. Tons of resources for people to just like go down a rabbit hole, which is fantastic. So thank you for creating all of that. Like we were saying at the beginning, it's so hard to find things, just like helpful, practical, tangible things that people can do to help them through this time. Yeah.
I answer every email. So if you send me a message, I'm happy to answer and point you in directions. If that's helpful too. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, the links to all the things she mentioned will be in the show notes. And thank you so much, Leanne. I'm just so pumped to hear this. And please reach out to Leanne, reach out to me and tell us what you thought. If there's anything you feel like we left out that's just so important, because I'm like, we obviously didn't, we like scraped a tiny bit of
like a part 2.
something like that. And if you have any any questions, then I can just have Leanne back on. So that's just too easy.
Yeah. Awesome. Cool. Well, thank you. Thank you, Danny.
Thanks for listening today. And if you want to get involved in the conversation with me, with other amazing women, just like the ones that you hear on the show, I recommend you get on the waitlist for the HA Society. It opens on the new moon of every single month. So if you're not on the waitlist, go to the show notes or just head to waitlist.thehasociety.com or thehasociety.com or wherever you want to go and join on that waitlist. And whilst I have you here, I think it would be amazing if you left a review for this podcast. Rate and review the podcast. It helps give me clout, allows me to get more badass guests on the show, and helps other women just like you find the podcast more easily when they're searching around the internet, all confused why they don't have a period, and it can help them find us in our little community.
Check out the latest footwear innovation from Adidas, the Adizero Adios Pro 2, which features carbon fiber energy rods that are both lightweight and precisely tuned for a more anatomical transition. Everything from the ultra-light polyester upper to the re-sculpted midsole and the reinvented outsoles are designed for speed. Visit adidas.com to learn more today.
Come to Audible for The Codebreaker, the latest audiobook from Walter Isaacson. Hear the incredible story of Nobel Prize-winning scientist Jennifer Doudna, who created a groundbreaking tool that can actually edit DNA. With Audible, you can access the latest releases, plus a selection of included podcasts, originals, and audiobooks that come with membership. Start a free 30-day trial today at audible.com.
We have right here. Okay, I love you. Have a good one.